This is Paula from Plantland again to talk to you today about planting tomatoes in containers. And I know a lot of you are interested in that, and it's how I grow all of my tomatoes because I don't do a big ground garden anymore, and the containers are just so much easier. So this is something you could do this time of year if you have a way to protect them from cold. It's way too early to be putting tomatoes out in the garden in the ground. The ground's nowhere near warm enough, but containers tend to heat up faster. And when I say protect them from cold, I'm talking about something like wall of waters, I'm talking about a greenhouse, or I'm talking about being able to put them inside a garage, not necessarily a heated garage, but a garage at night and only put them out during nice days. You can do that to protect them from frost. So this container is about the smallest size container that I would use to plant tomato plants in. And we're just going to put one tomato plant in this container. You can see this is a 20-inch pot. It's fairly deep and it's fairly good size around. The other thing you're going to notice here is I've got it filled about halfway with soil already. And this is just our potting mix, our two-full potting mix. You can use organic potting mix of some kind. You can use something like the Glacier Gold potting mixes that contain compost. My containers, I typically save them over the winter with the soil in them. I dump them out onto a tarp or into my garden cart, and then I mix them 50-50 with compost, either from my own compost bins or compost I get in bags here at Plantland. I'm pretty fond of the Glacier Gold brand because it's produced locally and they're a really good family and they do a lot for the community. But you do need to have rich soil. You're not really going to want to plant in just straight this, even though we're going to do that today, because then we're going to talk about fertilizers. We're going to kind of pretend that this is more of a compost mix today. A couple specialized things to know about tomatoes. This is one called Super Fantastic, and this would be true of any variety of tomatoes. You're going to notice on these, and I'm going to step forward, Michelle's going to zoom in a little bit, that there are lots of little hairs along the stem of a tomato plant. And what those little hairs mean is very important for us in our short growing season here in Montana. All of those little hairs are capable of developing into roots. One of the things about our short growing season is that we're trying to get root development as much as we can. Plants are pretty smart little critters. They don't produce any more top growth than they have bottom growth, root growth to support. So putting them in the ground, burying them deep so that you get all those little hairs to turn into roots is a good idea. In a container, it's as simple as burying them deep, and we'll do that in just a second. If you're doing it in the ground, you can lay them in a sort of trench and gently bend them up like this, and then you stake this, and it'll grow up just fine, and that stem will develop all those nice roots like we want it to. So step one of planting your tomatoes seems a little harsh to some people, but we're going to break off all these lower branches. And I'm just gently twisting them. All I want to be left with is that top growth, that top amount of growth. Set aside our tag because we do want to know what it is we planted. Give these pots just a little squeeze to get them to pop out. And then Michelle might want to come zoom in on what's happening in the thing here in the pot. You can see that I've basically put that tomato plant down in the bottom on that dirt. And now I'm going to start to cover it up with dirt. And this is going to take a second to start to fill my pot. I get to about that halfway point, distribute that dirt a little evenly, and then I take my hand, my claw, and I poke down like this. I'm trying to settle that soil down so that when I water, the soil doesn't settle down too much. Now it's sitting up there a little steadier. And before I get filled to where I want to be, filled to the top, I'm going to add two things. This is the point where we're going to add some fertilizer. This is the Happy Frog we like to recommend. Happy Frog has active soil microbes, which is very important when you're planting in potting mix in containers. And it has that good 4-9-3. That 9 is phosphorus. The first number is nitrogen, the second number is phosphorus, the third number is potassium. That 9, that middle number, planting tomato early like this, that helps with root development. It's also going to help with flower development that turns into fruit. So basically for this size pot, I've got a handful of this, and it is stinky stuff. And I'm just spreading that on the surface right now before I do my final fill. The other thing I'm going to add besides the Happy Frog, a lot of varieties of tomatoes, and the Romas I grow and the San Marzano heirloom paste tomatoes that I like to grow are very prone to what's called blossom end rot. That's that dark spot you get on the bottom of a tomato when it's just starting to turn ripe usually, and it ruins the tomato in a lot of instances. Calcium nitrate is something that helps avoid that. So at this stage in planting, I'm going to take that handful again and sprinkle it on the soil around this tomato plant. Both these are something that will get applied again during the growing season. So this I'll probably apply, the food I'll probably apply 2 more times. The calcium nitrate I'll probably apply 1 more time. There's also is a spray that you can use on your blossoms to prevent blossom end rot. Now that's not something all tomatoes get, but if you see it getting started on one tomato, you're going to want to start to treat it pretty quickly because it spreads. So now we're going to fill this pot the rest of the way. Same idea, I'm going to even that out a little bit. Poke it down with my finger claws, give it a little shake. Now you see I'm leaving about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of headroom in this pot. And that's very important too, because it means when I water all summer long, this soil is going to settle down just a little bit more and I'll have a little more space. What I can do with my hose is just take and fill that head space and keep filling it until I see water running out the bottom of the pot. So that's true when people ask how often I should water. Water running out the bottom of the pot is what's true no matter what time of year you're talking about. So in the later days, hotter days of summer, I'd probably be watering this twice a day. And if we had really hot weather where the nights were staying up in the 70s or so, I might even water it a 3rd time. The advantage to just pouring water into this headspace means I'm not getting the foliage wet. The next things to worry about are staking your tomato plants. And I like to put stakes in nice and early, right when I plant them, because it kind of eliminates the possibility of me damaging a root later when the plant is bigger, when I'm jamming this stake in. Now you can see I'm 5'4", so this is about a 5-foot stake, and this is cedar. Goes right in next to the plant. And early at this time of year, we would use some kind of soft tie to attach it to the plant. You can use things like strips of t-shirts, rags that you cut up. And here's something Michelle can zoom in on that I really want to show you because it's kind of important. If you take the stem of a plant, let's pretend this is the stem of the plant. We put the tie around it, bring it around, and then we cross it. And then we come back to the stick and tie our knot. So down here, I'm probably going too fast for Michelle. I'm crossing there, and I'm going to tie that as high as I can. Then I come back to the stick and tie the knot. And the reason for that little trick is kind of simple. It means that I won't crush that stem. If you just try to do it straight, it's more apt to slide, and you're much more apt to crush the stem. The next thing to talk about are tomato cages. Whoops. This is a tomato cage, and you can see it's about 4 feet tall. I'm going to take my tomato down off the stand it's been on. Tomato cages are something, again, that you need to use to provide support for these tomatoes when they're growing. They get heavy with fruit, and they need some gentle support to kind of keep them going. So that's a tomato cage. You can see how high that is, how that goes in there. And as the tomato grows, we're going to continue tying it to the stake, and we're going to continue to tie it to the edges of this tomato cage. Now, as this plant gets bigger, we'll talk more about how we prune kinds of tomatoes and things that we have to do to our tomatoes as they're growing. Really quickly, though, I'm just going to talk briefly about the other cages that we sell. People often mistake this cage, which is the peony cage, for the kind of cage that you put on a tomato. But you can see how much shorter it is once you put it in the soil. So it's just not going to work as well for providing support. We're going to be optimistic and believe our tomato plants are going to grow to be 4 feet high. This kind of cage, taller, not quite as big around, not quite as big of diameter, will also work as a tomato cage for something like cherry tomatoes, things like that. I use a tall cage like this on my tomatillos, which I grow in pots, because they grow very tall and leggy and are very hard to stake. And then there's smaller size cages available. These are just too small for a tomato, but they're perfect for something like an eggplant or a pepper. So there's all different kind of sizes of cages for you to pick from. But when you're dealing with your tomato plant, it's really important to actually use the tomato cage. Now, as this tomato grows through the season, we're going to keep it here at Plantland. We're going to put a wall of water around it today, and we're going to put it out front. Today, on April 18th, 17th? April 17th, we're going to put a tomato outside with a wall of water on it. And when you stop in, you can check on the tomato and see how effective those wall of waters are. So that's all there is to planting a tomato. Pretty simple little thing. We know you want to get started, and you can if you have containers and you have a way to protect your tomato from the cold. Can't go out when we're going to have frost. So this is Paula from Plantland, and happy gardening.